For today's video, we'll be making a return to the Cold War, and in this case, the Soviet Navy, and the very tail end of the Cold War for the most modern vessel I've covered so far. Although this video will be on the shorter end, because this is not a happy ship with a long and successful career. Though you probably already expected that when you hear Soviet Navy and tail end of the Cold War within the first minute. Today's topic is the communication ship, and I'm using air quotes here, Ural, SSV-33, or Project 1941 Titan, depending on what you want to call her. I've briefly touched on this vessel before in an old Top 5 Strange Ships video. When you look at her, you can kind of see why. This was a massive ship with a gargantuan dome. At the time, I made a joke about, what did you do to my nuclear-powered cruiser? The hull of Ural was based on the similarly massive Kirov class. Similar design lineage, but not identical. Compared to those ships, Ural was never intended for combat. This was a ship intended to be used for spy duty. That's why I used air quotes on communication ship. What they wanted to use the ship for was electronic reconnaissance, tracking American missile launches, and other such things. The Soviets lacked assets in the Pacific for this role, and that's what Ural was supposed to do. As we'll see, that wouldn't actually work out. But first, some background. In the late 1970s, the Soviets were starting to feel some pressure. American missile capacity was improving every day with newer and more numerous ICBMs. Relations were also cooling even further, putting more pressure on the Soviets to track American assets. A particular issue was the Pacific Ocean, where the United States would test missiles out of Soviet sight. The Russians had Vladivostok, of course, but not much beyond that in the Pacific. This left only a couple options. Aircraft were one, but those were limited. Ships, on the other hand, could serve a good role here, especially nuclear-powered vessels that weren't as heavily tied to a base. And a sufficiently large ship, like for example a Kirov, could support the kind of equipment you normally have ashore, especially the high-powered equipment needed to track missiles. Thus, by 1980, the Soviets had put together Project 1941 Titan. Exactly when isn't clear, but that's down to there not being good records in English, and possibly even in Russian. This would take the existing Kirov-class hull as a basis and modify it for the new design. Primarily, this involved making the thing even bigger. Project 1941 would displace 32,780 tons at the standard loading, and as high as 34,640 tons at the full load. For comparison, Kirov is 24,300 standard and around 28,000 at the full load. This size increase continues with the overall hull form. Project 1941 was 265 meters, 869 feet long, with a beam of 30 meters or 98 feet. Kirov is 252 meters, 827 feet long, and has a beam of 28.5 meters or 94 feet. As you can see, while Project 1941 was almost certainly derived from work on Kirov, they aren't the same design, even ignoring the changes in superstructure. Those changes are a result of the change in role. That massive dome isn't just for show. This ship had extremely powerful radio and radar detection equipment, including a pair of supercomputers, all of it intended mostly to track missile launches, both Soviet and American. The ship was designed to identify when a rocket was launched, what type of rocket, and the launch site, and from there track the trajectory of the rocket and its payload. This would give the Soviets valuable insight into American capabilities, and beyond that, how those compared to their own. The radio equipment could also monitor communication channels for a more traditional sort of spying mission. Of course, as you could expect for something so focused on spying, the ship didn't have much in the way of weaponry. A pair of 76mm AK-176 guns, one on the bow and one on the stern, and 4 30mm AK-630 guns for close-in defense, along with 4 12.7mm machine guns and some small surface-to-air missiles, with a hangar for a single Ka-27 helicopter as well. If this ship was in combat, something had gone terribly wrong. Moreover, with a speed of 21.6 knots, the ship wasn't exactly going anywhere fast. The power producing that speed varies on source. Some sources cite the same power plant as Kirov with 140,000 shaft horsepower. Others cite a lower power of 66,500. That dividing line seems to be on if the ship had the same reactors as Kirov or two of a different model. The fun of working with ships that aren't well sourced. Regardless, that rounds things off. Now for the service history, which is, well, not extensive. The ship was launched in May 1983 for a lengthy fitting out phase. She only entered service on January 7, 1989. Service that intended the ship to perform varied roles, from fleet flagship to the aforementioned missile tracking. For this, Project 1941, by now named Ural, had to sail to the Pacific. This would see a stopover at Cam Ranh in Vietnam before eventually sailing on towards Vladivostok. During this process, the ship tested her systems. At this point, to my knowledge, things worked well enough. But that would not last. There were no port facilities large enough to support the ship, so Ural had to moor in Strelok Bay near Vladivostok and keep her own equipment running to power the ship. Because of this, and the difficulty in fixing any mechanical issues, Ural never went far to sea. She mostly remained at her mooring, slowly falling apart. This ship was incredibly complex. Not just the reactors, but all that fancy electronic equipment. Needing to keep this running wore things out, and with the collapse of the Soviet Union, funding wasn't exactly easy to find, especially for the expensive electronics. Eventually, those began to break down, and Ural was reduced to a floating barracks. An hilariously expensive and oversized floating barracks. Not helped by a fire that broke out in 1990 that disabled an auxiliary boiler, of which the ship had two, intended to supply power while moored away from shore power. That didn't exactly help her case, nor did the fire burning out the aft engine room cables. The other boiler would go out in 1991, leaving the ship operating on her reactors and emergency diesel generators. By 2001, the increasingly dilapidated ship was decommissioned. Over the course of the 2010s, the superstructure was removed, with the final scrapping of the hull finishing by 2018. A shame, really, because as weird as this ship was, she had potential. But, like other ships that didn't do much, that potential was squandered. In this case, a good reflection of the poor state of the post-Soviet Navy in a lot of ways. Thank you for watching. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy the content, and I'll see you in the next one.